The knock came just as the rain began to fall harder, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers, and Margaret almost ignored it because she wasn't expecting anyone, the house unusually quiet, her thoughts drifting through old memories as she stood alone in the kitchen, the clock ticking louder than usual, but something about that knock felt different, hesitant, not demanding. And when she opened the door she saw Daniel standing there, her son-in-law, soaked lightly from the rain, holding a small paper bag close to his chest like it mattered more than it should, his smile polite but tired, the kind of smile people wear when they don't want to explain how long the day has been, and for a second Margaret just stared, surprised by how unfamiliar he looked outside family gatherings, without Emily beside him, without laughter filling the space, just him, quiet and unsure, saying he was in the area and thought he'd stop by, hoping it wasn't a bad time, and Margaret stepped aside without thinking, telling him he was always welcome, even though her heart felt a small shift she couldn't name, the house letting in the cool air and the smell of rain as he walked past her, glancing around like he hadn't been there in a while, noticing small things like the framed photos on the wall and the lamp Emily once broke as a teenager, and Margaret suddenly felt aware of the silence between them, the kind that isn't awkward but full, as if something unspoken was sitting in the room already. Daniel setting the paper bag on the kitchen counter and explaining he brought some fresh bread from a nearby bakery, remembering she liked it, and that small detail landed heavier than expected, because it reminded her that Daniel paid attention, that he remembered, that he carried pieces of other people with him, and as she thanked him and suggested they sit for a moment, she noticed the way his shoulders dropped slightly, like he had been holding something up all day and finally let it rest, the rain growing louder outside as if sealing them inside the moment, Margaret offering him coffee, then changing her mind and suggesting tea instead because it felt warmer, steadier, and as she filled the kettle she realized this visit wasn't casual, not really, because Daniel wasn't the type to stop by without reason, even if he couldn't name it himself, and she could see it in the way his eyes followed her movements, not in desire or curiosity but in quiet need, like he was searching for something familiar, something grounding, and she remembered the first time she met him years ago, young, nervous, trying hard to make a good impression, and now here he was older, worn around the edges, carrying responsibilities that showed in the lines on his face, and when she handed him the tea their fingers didn't touch but the moment still felt careful, intentional, as if both were aware of invisible boundaries, and Daniel thanked her again, mentioning Emily was traveling and he felt restless alone in their apartment, the words simple but heavy, and Margaret nodded, understanding more than she said, because loneliness has many forms and marriage doesn't erase it, and as they sat at the small kitchen table, rainlight reflecting off the floor, Margaret felt something stir, not romance, not longing, but recognition, the shared understanding between two people connected by love for the same woman, standing on different sides of her life, both wanting to protect her in their own way. And she realized this visit would stay with her long after the rain stopped, not because of what would happen, but because of what had already begun in the quiet space between words. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and wet rain as Margaret and Daniel moved around each other naturally, preparing a simple meal together, and it surprised them both how easily the rhythm settled, the chopping of vegetables, the stirring of pots, the clinking of utensils creating a soundtrack that made the small space feel alive. While conversation began with safe topics, Emily's busy schedule, the neighbor's new dog, the storm outside, but slowly, carefully, it deepened into something more personal, Daniel's voice lowering when he admitted he worried about Emily, that sometimes he felt powerless to help her, and Margaret nodded, understanding immediately, because she knew what it was like to love someone fiercely and watch them struggle, to feel the weight of responsibility for their happiness. And as she handed him a knife for the herbs he remembered she liked, rosemary, from the bag he had brought, there was a quiet exchange of trust, unspoken acknowledgement of their mutual care, and with every stir and chop, a gentle closeness grew, not romantic, not forbidden, but a recognition of shared emotion, of standing on parallel paths that converged in concern and affection for the same person, and Margaret noticed the lines around his eyes, the small tension in his shoulders, realizing how often he carried burdens alone, while Daniel watched her with subtle curiosity, realizing she was more than Emily's mother, that she had her own stories, her own silences, her own moments of longing and loss, and as the aroma of the simmering vegetables filled the room, the atmosphere shifted, light and warm, charged with unspoken empathy, and they laughed softly at small mistakes, a dropped carrot, an oversalted soup, and in those small, ordinary moments, a surprising intimacy developed. An emotional connection that was safe yet profound, leaving both aware that this visit was different from any other, that the kitchen had become a place of quiet understanding, where two people could see each other clearly for the first time beyond familial roles, and even as the rain pattered against the window and the shadows shifted with the flickering light, both sensed the edges of feelings that were new and unsettling, feelings that were not acted upon but acknowledged, delicate and gentle, and as they worked together, Margaret realized that sometimes sharing silence and small tasks could say more than words, while Daniel felt a warmth of being understood, a relief that he could drop the mask of always being strong for Emily, and in that moment, the kitchen was not just a room but a quiet witness to the connection forming, a bond born out of empathy, care, and the simple act of cooking together, a bond that neither had expected but both silently treasured, leaving them both aware that what had started as a casual visit had turned into something meaningful, subtle, and quietly transformative. The meal simmered gently on the stove as the conversation between Margaret and Daniel took a deeper turn, the initial light chatter giving way to honesty, and Daniel, stirring the soup absent-mindedly, confessed how often he felt unsure of how to support Emily, that no matter what he did, it sometimes seemed not enough, and Margaret, leaning against the counter, listened carefully, understanding the weight behind his words because she had carried similar worries for her own family, feeling the quiet ache of wanting to protect someone so deeply yet knowing you could not control everything, and as she spoke softly about love being less about fixing problems and more about staying present, Daniel nodded, realizing that her wisdom came from experience, from living through challenges and heartbreak, and the flickering light above cast a warm glow on the counter, on the steam rising from the pot, as if the kitchen itself had become a safe space for sharing hidden emotions. And he asked cautiously if she had ever felt the same kind of helplessness with her husband, and Margaret admitted she had, revealing briefly the regret she carried for words left unsaid, for moments when she wished she had expressed her feelings more fully, and the room held a charged quiet, not of tension, but of mutual recognition, a profound understanding of the fragility and depth of human emotion, and in that silence, both felt a closeness that was gentle yet intense, an emotional resonance that went beyond the surface of familial roles, and even though the awareness of boundaries lingered between them, it was respected, creating a delicate tension, a mixture of warmth and caution, where neither acted on the unexpected emotions that stirred inside, but both acknowledged their presence, learning from them, understanding the importance of empathy, and realizing that these feelings were not about desire but about seeing and being seen, about sharing vulnerability safely, about recognizing the quiet pain and longing in another person who loved someone you both cherished, and as they returned to their cooking, laughter and small comments filled the air again, lightening the heaviness, yet the depth of the earlier conversation left an imprint, a soft echo that reminded them of their humanity, of the subtle beauty of emotional connection, and Margaret felt an unfamiliar comfort in Daniel's presence, a sense of being heard without judgment, while Daniel felt relief in the shared understanding, a peace that came from talking to someone who truly got it, and as the pot bubbled gently, the kitchen seemed to hold them in a warm, intimate bubble, a space where they could exist honestly and tenderly without crossing lines, where emotions were acknowledged but not acted upon, leaving them both with a quiet clarity, a reinforced sense of boundaries, and an appreciation for the rare gift of connection that can happen when two people open their hearts, even briefly, to one another, realizing that sometimes the most powerful and meaningful moments come not from grand gestures, but from simple honesty, empathy, and the courage to share feelings without expecting anything in return, and as the evening wore on, the simmering soup mirrored the simmering understanding between them, subtle, nourishing, and transformative, leaving both Margaret and Daniel quietly changed, carrying with them the gentle awareness of what had passed in that small, warm kitchen, an emotional lesson about love, care, and human connection that would stay with them long after the moment ended. The meal was ready, and Margaret and Daniel sat together at the small kitchen table, the earlier tension softened into a calm, reflective quiet, as they ate slowly, each bite punctuated by brief conversation about trivial things, how the rain had eased, the warmth of the kitchen, a joke Emily would have laughed at, and yet beneath those words lingered the emotional weight of the evening, the honest exchanges and shared vulnerabilities that had quietly reshaped the atmosphere between them, and when Daniel finally stood, preparing to leave, he paused at the door, looking back with a gentle smile, a mixture of gratitude and unspoken understanding in his eyes, saying simply, "Thank you for tonight, for listening, for being here," and Margaret, touched, responded with a soft smile and a reminder to take care of both himself and Emily, the words carrying more depth than their simplicity suggested, a recognition of boundaries maintained, respect intact, and as he stepped into the night, the rain having eased to a soft drizzle, Margaret returned to the kitchen, her hands smoothing over the counters, the lingering warmth of the pots and the aroma of the meal reminding her that the evening had been more than a casual visit, that something meaningful had unfolded in quiet gestures, small words, and shared presence, the surprise not in what had happened but in what had been acknowledged without action, the delicate balance of emotions respected, and as she turned off the light, she felt a gentle settling within herself, a sense of quiet peace and understanding, realizing that moments like these, where hearts connect safely, emotions are recognized, and boundaries are honored, carry a subtle romance, not of desire but of empathy, care, and emotional intimacy, and that even though the visit had ended, the impression of the evening lingered, leaving both Margaret and Daniel with a renewed clarity, a deepened appreciation for their shared love for Emily, and an understanding that true connection often manifests in small, thoughtful actions, honest conversations, and the grace of knowing when to step back, making the night unforgettable not for dramatic gestures but for the soft, profound human connection that had quietly, respectfully, and beautifully unfolded in the warmth of the kitchen.